It's time for your weekly fix of wrestling nostalgia when we look at wrestling's past eras, from the Attitude Era to the Reality Era.
I'd like to think that maybe this company will be better after Vince McMahon's dead, but the fact is, it's gonna get taken over by his idiotic daughter and his doofus son-in-law and the rest of his stupid family.
To today, here on the WWE Podcast.
Hey, what's going on, guys, and welcome to Wrestling Nostalgia. And if you're listening to this, this means that Matt has had his baby, and a big congratulations to Matt and the rest of his family on welcoming his second child into the world. But now you guys are stuck with me for a few weeks doing Wrestling Nostalgia here exclusively on Patreon. And you'll be hearing from me later in the week to do the weekend review along with the standard WWE rivalries that will be coming on either Friday or Saturday. One of those 2 days, it always drops. But I'm very honored to be here on Wrestling Nostalgia. Not my first rodeo on Nostalgia. I've covered a few times with Matt, but certainly my first time by myself. So we will see how it goes, and I'm thanking you guys for being here along with the ride. And as you guys may know by now, my bread and butter is going back in time and bring you back to the time of wrestling when I was completely so invested in the product. And that's not to say that I am not now. But back in, let's say, the early to mid 2000s is when I completely fell in love with WWE. And we're going to go back to 2005 for the WWE draft that took place in June. And it's not the same type of concept that we have become accustomed to in recent years. And recently, we've seen that every draft, which now seems to be in the month of October, they all start from scratch again. Like, there's the rosters that we had come to know in the year leading up to it are just completely washed away, and SmackDown and Raw draft from an entire pool where all this talent is readily available to them. And I think it kind of takes a bit of the fun out of it. I think it takes away the identity from the brands, because back in the day, it was as if that each brand got X amount of picks and then they would swap over. It wasn't just like they would redraft the entire rosters. And I feel as though that when you redraft the entire rosters, and there's for sure going to be guys that stay on SmackDown from the year before, and ditto for Raw. Like, we saw that with the likes of Drew and Bobby Lashley staying on Raw, and let's say Roman Reigns and Kevin Owens staying on SmackDown. But I think it really takes away from the whole maybe shock value when you see the bigger names get transferred over when they aren't completely restarting the rosters from scratch. Like, I would argue that the biggest swap of brands this past draft in October was Seth Rollins heading to SmackDown. The first time that he got shifted to SmackDown since they rebirthed the brand split in the summer of 2016. But if they had not have restarted it completely and they would have kept all these rosters intact, I think it would have had way more of an impact. Case in point, the Mysterios followed Seth Rollins over to SmackDown. So how much of a change was it really for Seth Rollins when he went over there? So now, going back to the summer of 2005, WWE was in quite a transition. They had just culminated WrestleMania 21 a few months prior, where you had John Cena win his first ever WWE championship, Batista win his first ever World Heavyweight Championship, Randy Orton went toe-to-toe with The Undertaker, and although he lost, it was kind of a crowning achievement for him as well. So you really saw WWE ushering in a new era. And they had been about 3 years into the brand split at this point. And it was first started in March of 2002, directly following WrestleMania 18. And The year prior in 2004, they had a draft as well, but the names that switched around weren't that big. You know, all the main guys stayed on their respective brands. So you had Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Chris Jericho, Kane all stay on Raw. And on SmackDown, you had The Undertaker, Eddie Guerrero, Kurt Angle all stay over there. So you saw guys like the Dudleys and RVD and Booker T go over to SmackDown, and the likes of, let's say, Shelton Benjamin come over to Monday Night Raw. And that's just off the top of my head. Obviously, there was other names going to Monday Night Raw than Shelton Benjamin. But it was all like those mid-card and or tag team level talents that swap brands. But that was all done in one night, one Monday Night Raw. And I think they may have carried it over to a SmackDown. And that's how we've been accustomed to it since then. You know, every draft nowadays, you do one on SmackDown, one on Raw, or vice versa. But it's all done within the length of a week. But in 2005, they took a different approach where it would draw out the duration, or the length rather, of the month of June. And it was so long, the process that is, it was such a drawn out process that it really stretched across the month of June to the point where it crossed over with a pay-per-view that happened to be Vengeance, which was the June pay-per-view Raw exclusive back in 2005. So it was a different approach, it was authentic, and it was original, and it sure as hell caught my attention. So that's why on the first Monday Night Raw that the draft was underway, and how it would work is that every week each brand got one selection on their respective show, except for the last week where each brand would get two final selections. So the first Monday Night Raw under the draft, it was kicked off with the highlight reel hosted by Chris Jericho, where he would welcome the first draft selection in 2005 to head to Monday Night Raw.
My guest tonight, the very first pick of the draft lottery. Come on down! Who is it? Who is it? Is it a he or a she? Come on out! Well, whoever it is, they're late. Is there really somebody?
So I'm sure all you guys knew about this. It's one of the, if not the most famous draft selection in the history of the WWE draft, as John Cena, along with the WWE Championship, gets drafted over to Monday Night Raw. And it was the first time in just about 3 years that championship had become exclusive to Monday Night Raw, or appeared on Monday Night Raw. Because for the 3 preceding years, it had been the exclusive World Championship to SmackDown. And this was the first ever selection that they had made that involved the champion bringing over his or her respective championship over to the other brand. And it wasn't like today where you have, let's say, the SmackDown Women's Championship and the Raw Tag Team titles. Like, there were no brand exclusive championships. But even though there weren't titles that were exclusive to brands, it was kind of an unwritten rule. You know, WWE Championship, Cruiserweight, US title would be on SmackDown. Raw had the World Heavyweight Intercontinental Women's Championship, and then they each had their respective tag team championships. But even their tag team titles, SmackDown had the WWE tag team titles, and Raw had the World Tag Team titles. So it wasn't even like the brands had like their name on the championships. It was just like unwritten rules that said titles were exclusive to their respective brands. So you get John Cena going to Monday Night Raw, bringing over the World Championship, and there was just so many wrinkles in this thing because you have now arguably the biggest star in the company, or at least jockeying for position with Batista to become the biggest star in the company, going over to Raw, leaving a massive void atop the SmackDown roster, both with himself leaving and taking the World Championship along with him. So this was a massive, massive move. They pulled the trigger on it, and I think this was the start of them pushing John Cena to the moon. So SmackDown rolls around, and I thought, okay, Batista's going over to Friday Night SmackDown. I believe it was on Friday nights by this point. And I'm waiting for Batista to come out. But even though I'm expecting Batista to come out and bring the world title over to SmackDown, in the back of my mind, I'm saying, I mean, he's still in the thick of a program with Triple H. Like, they can't really pull the plug over. And then I'm thinking, like, are they going to send Triple H over to SmackDown too? Like, Triple H had never been on SmackDown to this point since the inception of the brand split. Like, what are they going to do? And when SmackDown comes around, Teddy Long addresses that they lost arguably their biggest star and their undisputed world championship. And when the selection is made, it's rather underwhelming. And not for the superstar that comes over, because in his own right, he was a big-name superstar, but more for the fact that when the name was announced by Teddy Long and his music hit, we realized that this guy was not bringing over a championship to SmackDown.
The first for SmackDown.
Here we go.
And believe me, it gets no better than this, dog. I'm talking about a man that has main evented WrestleMania. I'm talking about a man that has been a former world heavyweight champion. And right now, this man is back at home. Ladies and gentlemen, show your love for Chris Benoit! Whoa! Oh, my! Oh, yeah! The Rabbit Wolverine! Chris Benoit! A standing ovation from the SmackDown faithful! I can't believe it! Awesome! Former world heavyweight champion! A man you know extremely well! Oh, yeah!
So Chris Benoit is the first selection to Friday Night SmackDown. And as I said before I played the clip, like, it's not a slight against Chris Benoit, but you're expecting more than a guy who at this point was an upper mid-card guy with no championship to carry over to his new home over on SmackDown to make up for the loss of John Cena. So you get Benoit back over to SmackDown. You know, he had been on Raw for just a year and a half at this point when he transferred over there following the Royal Rumble win in 2004. So he kind of goes back over to his home on SmackDown because aside from his World Heavyweight Championship run, he was always a SmackDown guy. And it's weird to say, right? Because you could define Benoit more as SmackDown, but he had his best run of his career over on Raw. So you can make the case that he was more of a Raw guy. But him going back over to SmackDown was not anything shocking or foreign territory for the audience. But you're still, while you're excited to see Benoit over on SmackDown and it's going to be awesome, and maybe you could see him versus Eddie or him versus JBL or him versus Angle, him versus versus Undertaker, you're still saying, well, man, there's still no world champion on this show. Like, the biggest name champion on this show right now is Orlando Jordan with the U.S. title. Like, you know, that's not saying a whole lot. So before Benoit actually came out, you had JBL confront Teddy Long about there being a void of no world champion, no SmackDown champion. And Teddy Long announces that there will be a tournament towards the end of the month to crown a new SmackDown world champion. So that's something to keep in mind as we go on here. So we get over to Monday Night Raw. So now, in my opinion, and obviously it's subjective, but Raw has the massive advantage here. that they got John Cena, arguably the hottest star in the company, along with being the WWE champion, and they lost Benoit to SmackDown, who in his own right was an awesome wrestler, but not nearly as well positioned as Cena and has no world championship to his name at that point. So when Raw rolls around, Eric Bischoff hits another home run with his draft selection.
If it is a him.
So Kurt Angle is the second man drafted over to Monday Night Raw, and this one was huge. And you could make the case that this was bigger than the John Cena acquisition. And just for the point that we had not seen Kurt Angle over on Monday Night Raw since early 2002. So we're talking 3+ years for one of the most significant wrestlers of this generation not being on the flagship show of the company. And what made this even more special is that Triple H and Ric Flair were waiting in the ring for Kurt Angle. And if you guys know the long storied history of Triple H and Kurt Angle, going back to the summer of 2000, they had a feud over Stephanie McMahon. And, you know, that even resulted with Kurt Angle kissing an unconscious Stephanie McMahon. So there was a lot of things to draw off of and a lot of animosity between these two that were laying dormant. So it was really cool for them to shift a star the magnitude of Kurt Angle back over to Monday Night Raw, a place that he had not called home for over 3 years. So again, like now we're 2 weeks into this, and granted, SmackDown only had one draft pick to its name, but Raw is just clean in house here. You get the hottest star in the company and WWE champion in John Cena, and now Kurt Angle, one of the biggest stars of the last generation, going over to Raw. So now when SmackDown comes around that same week and it's time for them to get their second pick, it was imperative for them to really, really strike a home run here. And when Teddy Long announced who that would be, you started to think that maybe SmackDown would be doing all right when all was said and done.
Undertaker! Undertaker! Undertaker, you've just been RKO'd. You better get used to it, because the Legend Killer is officially on SmackDown. Randy Orton, the number 2 draft pick of SmackDown for Raw.
So SmackDown gets Randy Orton with their second selection, and this was a big one, right? Because although he isn't bringing over a championship, he kind of makes up for what SmackDown lost in John Cena with that young up-and-coming star. And he interferes with in Undertaker's match with John Bradshaw Layfield, and then reveals that he is the second draft pick. And now they're going to start playing off of the feud that Orton had with Taker leading into WrestleMania 21 that had just taken place 3 months prior. So you get Randy Orton over to SmackDown, and although SmackDown is still missing that quintessential world championship, you get the young star power in Randy Orton to make up for the loss of Cena. And then you get Benoit and Kurt Angle theoretically washing each other out, but I think that Kurt Angle was still out ahead of than Benoit. So although SmackDown did well by bringing in Randy Orton. I would still say that after 2 weeks, Raw was still making out like bandits. They get the WWE Championship along with Cena, and then you get one of the biggest stars of that generation in Kurt Angle. And you lose Orton, you lose Benoit, but it still is worth it considering who you bring in. So the third week of Raw comes around, and not to say that they take a back seat with who they draft over, but it was clear that it wasn't so much star power, but more looking to the future in terms of potential.
Be facing the next draft lottery pick for my Intercontinental Championship. Yeah, I'm sure you were kind of thinking that, but I'm sure rather than listen to another boring Eric Bischoff speech, these people would like to see just exactly who we got coming down the ring. So, will the next lottery pick winner come out, wherever you are.
It's gonna be? I don't know. Is he gonna face Shelton Benjamin?
I've seen the face of people who don't want to be cool.
Oh, look at the smile on Bischoff's face! Can you believe this? Oh, look at this! It's Carlito! Man, Raw has hit the jackpot one more time! You know, he is Caribbean cool, JR. There's no doubt about that. A second-generation star is this young man, Carlito.
So Carlito goes over to Monday Night Raw, and they were really starting to push this guy, and he was coming off of an injury that kind of derailed his progress over on SmackDown. But I'm sure, as all of you guys remember, I reviewed this on Rivalries in the past, that he started out his career with a bang. His first ever appearance on SmackDown, he defeats John Cena for the United States Championship, and goes on to have about a 2-month-long program with Cena that culminates at, I believe it was Armageddon 2004. And then they send him over to SmackDown, maybe a fresh start, really spun his tires over on, or they sent him to Raw, rather, after spinning his tires on SmackDown, in large part due to that injury. And in his first match on Monday Night Raw, he defeats Shelton Benjamin for the Intercontinental Championship. And that was kind of what they did with Carlitos. He had a pretty big push for the following year. You know, he was on Team Raw at Survivor Series. He tagged with Chris Masters, although they never won the tag team championships. But getting Carlito was more of an up-and-coming type of middle card star that had a lot of promise and potential heading into the future. So when we get over to SmackDown for their third selection, the guy that they end up with coming over from Monday Night Raw is of the similar tier level that you would say Carlito was at.
The pig is in the mix with Jimmy. Look at him. Now what the hell is this? You gotta be kidding me! Wait a minute. This isn't wrong, is it? That's Muhammad Hassan and Davari. I saw them up on the Raw Monday night. Wait, Nicole, you don't think... No. This has gotta be the... It can't be. This has gotta be the draft pick. It's gotta be. Oh, man. Down draft pick. Muhammad, I guess it's a package deal, yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, if Muhammad is the draft pick, he will be the most unwelcome draft pick in history. Bar none.
So Muhammad Hassan, along with Davari, get drafted over to SmackDown. And, you know, you can make the case that Hassan was a bigger and hotter heel than Carlito was, just because he played that foreign invader role so well. But unfortunately for Muhammad Hassan, this character, this gimmick, and his career as a whole on SmackDown never really gets off the ground after the infamous incident on UPN with the after the London bombings. And, you know, I'm sure you guys have heard that story ad nauseum at this point, so I won't get into it. But on the surface and in a vacuum, this was a really good pick for SmackDown. And this was a new place for Muhammad Hassan to really broaden his horizons. And had it not been for that unfortunate incident and UPN really telling WWE to pull the plug on this character, who knows, maybe Hassan becomes one of the best heels of that generation. But for one reason or another, it doesn't work out. And it kind of leaves SmackDown with an empty pick, right? Because Hassan, after a few months being on SmackDown, gets pulled off of television and never to be seen again. while Carlito is still, playing a mid-card heel that is involved in some main event level programs. So, after 3 weeks, each brand getting 3 selections, it's still easy to say that Raw is well out ahead here. And SmackDown at this point, the one intrigue that they have going for them is that new SmackDown Championship. And before Hassan interrupted this, the promo going on in the ring, you had Teddy Long there holding the championship in a bag. Big Show, Booker T, Benoit, JBL, all vying, trying to put themselves in contention for that new championship. So we get over to Monday Night Raw. And this is the first Raw following the Vengeance 2005 pay-per-view, where you had John Cena successfully defend his WWE Championship against Jericho and Christian. Batista win the 3rd match in a row against Triple H inside Hell in a Cell to retain his World Heavyweight Championship. And it was the first pay-per-view that saw both of those world titles be defended other than one of the big 4. So it was the first pay-per-view that both championships were involved in that was not Survivor Series, Royal Rumble, SummerSlam, and Mania. So it was a very big pay-per-view in that regard. And it was a very big time for WWE as a whole. So now Raw comes around and is the night of the final night of the draft selections for the Raw brand. And as I mentioned previously, on this night, they would get 2 selections. So their first selection was one that really shocked me. And given the size of this superstar, literally and figuratively shook the landscape of Monday Night Raw.
Hey, boss, what's up, baby? Well, this was scheduled to be a tag team match, with Kane's partner being the first of 2 draft lottery picks. But since Kane and Edge have left Snitsky, it looks like you're going to be going one-on-one with this draft pick. And by the way, this is the biggest draft pick yet. I told you. And Snitsky, no matter what he does to you, it's not my fault.
Uh-oh. Who could possibly? I don't know. My curiosity is sky high right now. Who could it be, guys? Snitsky doesn't look like he's going to care. Big time! Will you look at that? The biggest athlete in all of sports entertainment! The biggest athlete in the world! The Big Show! Now I know what my boss meant by the biggest draft lottery pick today. I get it. 500 pounds! What an awesome...
So, Big Show gets sent over to Monday Night Raw, and much like the Kurt Angle draft selection that sent him over to Monday Night Raw as well, Big Show going to Raw was crazy to see because he was kind of a legacy star at this point, and maybe not at the same level of Kurt Angle, but one of the bigger stars, figuratively and literally, of the last generation that had not been on Monday Night Raw for close to 3 years. He was originally drafted there in the first ever draft, but then quickly went back over to SmackDown once Stephanie McMahon took over in the fall of 2002. So you're talking 2.5 years now that Big Show was exclusive over onto the SmackDown brand. And he had kind of done all that he could do over on SmackDown. Like, he had a long heel run as kind of like Paul Heyman's lackey, kind of as Brock Lesnar's henchman for a bit after they had a short program. Had, I believe it was 2 runs with the WWE Championship. Had a lengthy run with the US title. But then once you got into late 2004, early 2005, he changes babyface. He has a program with Kurt Angle, has a kick at the can or a few kicks at the can at the championship against JBL that he was ultimately not successful in. And then his main event match is a sumo match against Aki Bono, I believe his name was. Quite literally a sumo match at WrestleMania 21. Go check that out. So Big Show's career was really kind of at a standstill. Like, he wasn't moving anywhere fast. He wasn't sliding down anywhere fast. But he needed a change. And him going over to Monday Night Raw was a breath of fresh air for his career. You know, he formed an excellent tag team with Kane. They won the tag team titles at Taboo Tuesday in October of that year. They were heavily involved in the Raw versus SmackDown program. And it was really a much-needed change for the Big Show. And I think that tag team title run he had with Kane was one of the biggest high points of his career, which is saying something because usually you don't think too much of, the tag team championship run. But for these two guys forming arguably one of the most dominant tag teams of all time, it was really good. So Big Show goes over to Monday Night Raw, and it leaves them with one final draft pick here. And this draft pick was one who had been drafted over to SmackDown the year prior. So they're sending him back to Monday Night Raw to hope to restart his career again after he really suffered a lot of injuries over the last 6 months that kept him out of WrestleMania. And I'm sure you guys would be familiar with this. And he would only spend 1 year over on Monday Night Raw. But while he was there, he was one of the more impactful competitors.
Do you have any idea?
Let's go.
Oh my God!
Well, this is the limit, all right. Wait a minute.
Well, this is Rob Van Dam. He's no limit. I can guarantee you that.
I don't know why this crowd's so crazy, King. What's up with this shirt?
This crowd on their feet. Van Dam still recovering from knee surgery. But what a selection!
Wait a minute, he's on Raw, not ECW. What's with this guy? What's with that shirt? I hate that shirt. I thought ECW was done. Obviously, RVD didn't get the memo.
We like to live in the past. But ECW is alive and well.
So RVD gets drafted back to Monday Night Raw as the final draft selection for the brand in the 2005 draft. And he was still injured, as you heard Jim Ross say, and he only really returns, I want to say, around WrestleMania season in the winter of 2006. I may be wrong, but, you know, he goes on to win Money in the Bank, goes on to win the WWE Championship at ECW One Night Stand in June of 2006, and then quickly becomes a part of the ECW brand, and then for personal reasons gets the push pulled from him, and we know that story. So while, again, kind of similar to that of Muhammad Hassan, on the surface, in a vacuum, this is an awesome pick for Monday Night Raw, as they're once again trying to push Rob Van Dam, getting him a fresh start back on Monday Night Raw after only a couple months over on SmackDown due to injury. But because of everything that transpired, him being released in real life, him moving over to the relaunched ECW brand, his acquisition on Monday Night Raw never really meant a whole lot to the brand. And yeah, he had a short run winning the Money in the Bank as a member of that brand and having a good program with Shelton Benjamin. They had an awesome ladder match at Backlash 2006. But all in all, this draft pick did not mean a whole lot to the brand. And once we're done, there's a couple other things that I have to say about each individual selection. But I just remember thinking that back on this about how Van Dam going back to Monday Night Raw really didn't amount to a whole lot. So now we get over to SmackDown, the final night, the end of the month of June, the 30th of the month, and SmackDown has two final draft picks to round out their roster. And this is the night that they would crown the first ever SmackDown World Champion, which would be in a six-pack challenge match featuring The Undertaker, Chris Benoit, Booker T, JBL, Muhammad Hassan, and the second to last draft pick to SmackDown in the WWE draft.
Christian!
No! Captain Charisma? Yeah, there he is! Oh, wait a minute! Christian getting a shot at the SmackDown Championship here tonight on his first night on SmackDown! I think that's cool. I like Captain Charisma. He's got peeps everywhere, this guy. Oh, man!
Well, his peeps could be following here to SmackDown. Hey, maybe you get to be the United Peep Network.
I don't know, maybe. I mean, for now, it's a six-man, not a five-man. And
So Christian, kind of a weird spot for him to be put in, because I don't want to devalue what Christian brings to the table. And him going over to SmackDown was a big deal because, much like, let's say, The Big Show and Kurt Angle, he was a guy that was exclusive to one brand for the entirety of this brand split for the 3 years that it had been in existence. But, you know, over on Monday Night Raw, he didn't really carry a big pedigree. He had never won a world championship to this point, had a few solid runs with the IC title, but even at that had not held it for over a year at this point, or almost 2 years. So he was just kind of like a big-ish name to go over to SmackDown. But even again, him, you know, Christian did not do a whole lot over on SmackDown. And I believe he left the company shortly thereafter. And so again, it was just kind of another empty draft pick for SmackDown. And it's unfortunate, right? Because Christian is a guy that could have brought so much more to the table had he stuck around and maybe had a run with the U.S. title, or maybe even gotten a run with the World Heavyweight Championship, which he eventually did get upon his return to the company, and I believe it was 2011. So there's one final pick here to SmackDown to round out its roster. But before that could happen, we had to see what would transpire in terms of the new SmackDown World Championship. And lo and behold, John Bradshaw Layfield wins the six-pack challenge to be named the new SmackDown World Champion, the inaugural SmackDown World Champion. But when he finally secured the victory, Teddy Long had an unexpected surprise for JBL.
I believe Christian made a tag. Look at this. Here's a roll up. He made a shoulder down. No, wait a minute. He got it. Christian made a tag. Booker T has been eliminated. I don't think Booker even realized it. When a tag was made, the referee said I was leaving. So we are down to two men. Christian and JBL. One of those two men will become SmackDown champion. Booker T's livid. I don't blame Booker. He feels he got ripped off here, but oh, what a way to go down. That sucks for him. I mean, really, that... So it's Christian and JBL, the legal men now, with the SmackDown Championship on the line. Christian celebrating. Not over yet, my man. Hey! Oh, my God! The clothesline from hell! Here's the cover! Whoa! Holy God! JBL's the champ! Here's your winner and the new SmackDown Champion, John Bradshaw. He did it! JBL won the SmackDown Championship here tonight! He did it, JBL! And here comes our general manager the presentation with the new SmackDown title. Oh my God, JBL's ecstatic! JBL said he should have been handed the championship. But yet JBL had to go out here and win it tonight in a six-man elimination matchup. Well, there it is. Let's see that, man. But I've been wanting to see that title since last week.
JBL, I've got some good news, and I've got some bad news for you, player.
What?
Now, the bad news is, even though you won the match, you are not the SmackDown champion.
What? What the heck?
You know something, player? Recently, I found out that there's no need for a SmackDown championship. Now, the good news is that you have earned the right to be the new #1 contender to this man. Now, ladies and gentlemen, everybody get ready to show your love for the final draft lottery pick and world champion, Batista!
What the hell? Oh, my! Is this a joke? What the hell's going on here?
No, it's not a joke. He's the latest draft lottery.
Where is he? I'll see it when I believe it. Oh, my God, I believe it. Holy, I hope this is great.
SmackDown has hit the jackpot.
Holy cow, the world.
So Batista is the final selection for SmackDown in the WWE Draft Lottery for the year of 2005, and he brings over the World Heavyweight Championship, thus voiding the new championship that was going to be theoretically created. And John Bradshaw Layfield, instead of becoming the new SmackDown champion, becomes the number one contender to Batista's world title. And there were some other under the radar, selections that weren't televised. Like you had William Regal, Simon Dean, Steven Richards, Sylvain Grenier, and Candice Michelle go into SmackDown. And then on Raw, you had Jindrak, Dupree, one of the Basham brothers, Kenzo Suzuki, and Chavo Guerrero going over there. But these were the main ones. And when you break it down, you really have to say that Raw made out like bandits here in the grand scheme of things. Because we obviously know what John Cena meant to the company. Big Show had a solid run there. And just those two alone were amazing draft selections. Kurt Angle was, in my opinion, an excellent pick, but he went back over to SmackDown in 6 months because Batista got hurt, had to drop the championship, and then they sent Kurt Angle over there to be a reasonable facsimile to Batista and carry the world title into WrestleMania. And even a guy like Rob Van Dam, it was a short-lived run, but ultimately he did have some kind of an impact on Monday Night Raw. But then you look at who SmackDown got, and obviously Batista was a home run, but he didn't have quite the impact that Cena had over on Monday Night Raw, and I'm sure how their careers played out is indicative of that. Chris Benoit, I mean, he was only around for 2 more years after this, following the tragedy that took place, but his biggest claim to fame was several runs with the U.S. title. Randy Orton went back over to Monday Night Raw after a year. Muhammad Hassan had the plug pulled out from him kind of less than a month after getting shifted over to SmackDown. Christian didn't even last a couple months over on SmackDown. So, I mean, Raw just getting like a solid run out of Kurt Angle feuding with Cena. Cena becoming one of the biggest stars of the generation. Big Show having a really kind of a rebirth of his career over on Monday Night Raw, and then ultimately transitioning to ECW. Carlito having a solid run on Monday Night Raw. I think Monday Night Raw really hit a home run here, and they got the WWE Championship back over to Monday Night Raw, where it has kind of made its home for predominantly since this year in 2005. Obviously, the Universal Championship was over there for a few years, but it switched back over in 2019 when Brock Lesnar took it back to Monday Night Raw, and it has since stayed that way. So, I mean, it was, in my opinion, the most significant draft in the history of WWE, and I think that it was kind of a lopsided one in favor of Monday Night Raw when you take everything into consideration. But these were pretty significant draft picks considering that they weren't redoing the entire rosters as we see today. Like the likes of Kurt Angle, John Cena, Randy Orton, Batista, all changing brands, with them all keeping the pre-existing rosters intact, is saying something of the magnitude that this draft had, shaking up the landscapes in the immediate future. Obviously, as I just mentioned, some of the draft picks kind of fell flat for one reason or another. But in a vacuum, this was one of the more, if not the most significant draft lottery in the history of the company. Well, anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed my first ever coverage of Wrestling Nostalgia, subbing in for Matt. I will surely be back here next week and possibly the week after, and I'll be talking to you later this week with rivalries and the week in review. As always, you can get me on Twitter at AdaMarco25. You can get Matt on Twitter at wrestling_audio. And you can email him at realwwepodcast@gmail.com. So, guys, I will be talking to you on Friday. I'll be talking to you on Sunday. I'll be talking to you next Wednesday. You'll be hearing a lot from me in the coming weeks as I help Matt out following the great event in his life. So until next time, guys, I'll talk to you on Friday.